Good evening and welcome to the Law School Application Process Essentials Top Admissions Questions webinar. I'm Nicole Vilches, Assistant Dean for Admissions.
And I'm Gabriela, Amador, Director of Admissions. We appreciate you joining us.
So tonight's webinar is designed to answer some of the top admissions questions that we receive each year. We'll begin by answering a list of our top 10 questions related to the application process and the LSAT, and then we'll open it up for your questions. We hope tonight's presentation will give you useful information about the law school application process. And I will now turn things over to Gabriela.
So we'll first start with application process questions. The first question, when is the best time to apply for admission? So law school application deadlines vary, so you'll want to check with each law school about specific deadlines. It's always better to apply early in the admission cycle if at all possible. However, you should apply when it's the best time for you. We recommend starting to prepare your law school applications in the fall and applying by January. If you are not able to apply before January, you should apply as soon as you can. The February LSAT is accepted at Chicago Penn, but you should also check with each law school that you plan to apply to.
Second question, what makes a good personal statement? And this is definitely one of the top questions that we get each year. The personal statement is obviously a writing sample, so it needs to be well written and free of grammatical errors. But this is also your chance to really highlight your strengths and what makes you unique for the admissions committee. You can think of it as your interviewer opportunity with the committee, since most law schools aren't able to provide you with a personal interview. It's a chance to highlight your strengths, and it's a chance to connect with the committee on a personal level. We recommend that you use your own voice and that you tell us about yourself and what makes you unique. You can highlight your skills and accomplishments, you can highlight unique things about your background, or anything else that you think makes you a competitive applicant for admission. There's really not a right or wrong way to write a personal statement, as long as it's providing helpful information for us to use as we consider you as a candidate for admission.
What can I do to make my application stand out? So one of the things you can do is apply early. You would want to carefully choose your recommenders. Those things will help you stand out with the admissions committee. And you definitely want to highlight any unique qualities or experiences that you have.
If I have a weakness in my application, should I address it? I definitely think that you should. As I review applications, I'd much rather hear from you in your own words about why something happened than to be left guessing. So if you maybe had some poor undergraduate grades, or you had a weak LSAT score and then retook it and did better on the second test, I'd like to know why that is. What accounted for that? What did you learn from the experience? On the other hand, though, you also want to be careful not to spend more time than necessary addressing weaknesses. So you can be concise, you don't need to spend a lot of time on it. Just tell us what accounted for it, what you learned from the experience, and why this isn't going to be an issue once you're in law school. This is particularly true if you need to answer yes to any of the character and fitness questions. So perhaps you had disciplinary action in school or some sort of criminal conviction for something. The committee is really interested in learning what you learned from that experience and why you won't repeat that in law school.
Next question, who should write my letters of recommendation? So we'll suggest that your letters of recommendation be written by a college professor who is familiar with you and your intellectual abilities. However, if you have been out of school for a few years, it may be better to submit a letter of recommendation from a supervisor or someone who knows you well and can speak to your intellectual abilities as well as your work ethic. You don't want to have someone submit a letter of recommendation based on the title, but more so someone who knows you well and can speak to your abilities more than anything else.
So next question, if I've been out of school for over 5 years, how will my work experience be considered, and do my undergraduate grades still matter? So certainly the longer you've been out of school, the more the admissions committee is going to look to see what you've done since graduating, and in particular what you're doing currently in your career. So we definitely have a lot of other things to look at for someone who has a significant amount of work experience. Your undergraduate grades are still an important factor, obviously, because that represents work that you did over a 4-year period. It's a universal basis of comparison that we have for all applicants, but we also realize that those undergraduate grades may not tell the whole story of who you are as a candidate for admission. So we'll definitely consider your work experience. We'll consider graduate work if you've done that, and all of that information will be factored in. We also would expect that you're more likely to have recommendations from people that you've worked with professionally than professors, particularly the longer you've been out of school.
Next question, when should I take the LSAT? So ideally, you'll want to take the LSAT by December for admission to the following fall semester. If you're taking a later exam, you will want to have your application material submitted to LSAT if at all possible. If that's, that may not always be possible, but when you can, taking the LSAT early is always a good idea.
Another common LSAT question, should I apply before or after I receive my LSAT score? So that really depends in part on where we're at in the application cycle. So if it's really early in the cycle, you may want to not worry about the application at this point, just concentrate on studying for the LSAT, taking the test, and wait to apply until after you receive your LSAT score. If it's later in the admissions cycle, so say you're taking the February test and those scores will be coming out in early March, you may want to go ahead and get your application in so that it's ready and processed, and all we're waiting for is that LSAT score. So that can help us to get the file to the admissions committee more quickly than if you wait until after your score comes out. You do want to be aware that we will not review your application without an LSAT score, so even if you submit it now, if you're taking the February LSAT, we're not going to actually send it to the committee or do any sort of evaluative review of it until after we get your February LSAT score. But we will go ahead and get it processed, and that allows us to confirm that we have all the other necessary materials, and that group of files that we're holding for future LSAT score are the first files that we complete after the scores come out. So that'll get your file to the committee ahead of the people that wait until after the scores come out to apply.
So question number 9, what do law schools do with multiple LSAT scores? So at Chicago-Kent, we will take into consideration all of your LSAT scores, but we will give preference to the higher score. If there's a major difference between your scores, whether it's 2 or 3 different scores, we recommend that you write an addendum addressing the differences or the reason for those differences.
Our final question, should I retake the LSAT? That's obviously a big question. It's a very personal decision, and it's really not something that we or any other law school admissions person can give you a definitive answer on it. You really need to weigh the benefits of spending that additional time preparing, the cost of retaking the test, and the fact that you'd be applying later in the cycle against the possible benefit of having a stronger score when you do submit your application. Obviously, it's always good to apply as early as possible in the admission cycle. So by retaking the test, that's going to push your application back later in the process. And so you need to think about how strong of a chance is it that you'll improve your score versus the possible negative impact by applying later in the admission cycle when it may be more competitive. I also think it's really important to spend some time doing additional practice tests, doing some additional preparation so that you feel fairly certain your LSAT score will improve. You really don't want to retake the LSAT if you're not seeing a significant improvement in your practice tests, or if the score you actually received was not significantly different from what you had seen in your practice tests leading up to that exam. So again, think about all of these factors, try to weigh them all before you make that decision to retake the LSAT. So what we'd like to do now is use the remaining time to answer any questions that you have about the admissions process or about Chicago-Kent. To ask a question, you can use the questions box in the webinar software, and we'll be happy to answer those questions for you. So feel free to just type in your question, and we will answer it for you. So it looks like we have our first question, which is, how common is it or manageable is it for students to hold a job while in law school, and specifically during the first year? So that's a great question. We really recommend that you, if at all possible, and particularly if you're a full-time student, if at all possible, you really devote the majority of your time to your academics and to your classes in the first year. There's no rule from the American Bar Association about whether or not students can work. Chicago-Kent has a rule that if you're taking more than 13 credit hours in a semester, you can't work more than 20 hours per week. Now, we do have first-year students who will have on-campus jobs. Some of them help out the admissions office as tour guides, and some other offices hire students. And so if you can get a job where your employer will be understanding of the demands of your first year and allow you to put your academics first, it can be possible to work a bit during your first year. But if you don't need to, it is good to focus on your classes. Now that doesn't hold true the same for part-time students. The part-time program is designed for people who want to have a full-time job and take classes in the evening. And so it's fine to have a job and work if you're a part-time student. So our next question is, what months are considered early and late in the admissions process? Do you want to do that one, Gabby?
Sure. What months are considered early? So at Chicago-Kent, we began accepting applications. Typically, it's been October this year. We started accepting applications in mid-September. So certainly applying in September, October, November is early. Late, I think anytime after February or March. Our suggested deadline at Chicago-Kent is March 15th. It's not a hard deadline. We operate under rolling admissions. So you can apply after the March 15th deadline, but the admissions committee does become more selective later in the cycle. So it's definitely an advantage if you can apply, prior to February, I'd say.
Our next question, it's my understanding that some law schools put greater emphasis on GPA versus LSAT score and others vice versa. So obviously both criteria are important, but which is the most important to Chicago-Kent? And it's really impossible to pick one. We take a holistic view of each applicant's qualifications for law school. And so the weight that those factors are given is really unique to each applicant. So some applicants are stronger in one area or another. What we're ultimately trying to do is look at everything we're learning about you through the process. So that includes your LSAT score, it includes your undergraduate grades and how you did over the 4 years, what your major was, how you did in your upper level coursework, but then it also includes your recommendations, other things you're telling us about your background and the experiences you've had, work experience. All of that's going to get factored in. And so we're ultimately trying to get a sense of what are your strengths, what are the skills that you bring to the table as a prospective law student, how well do you think you would do at Chicago-Kent? So, the perfect candidate is the one where both the GPA and the LSAT are strong, because that gives us a lot of confidence that person will do well in law school. But not everyone has that. And so we certainly admit students that are stronger in one area versus another. And we admit people who maybe, both LSAT and GPA are at the lower end of where we're typically admitting, but we see really positive things in that person's file. We think they're a great fit for Chicago-Kent, and the committee wants to see them in the entering class. So it really is a unique process for each applicant. So next question is, how much weight is given to the personal statement and reference letters?
So, I'll say that we give equal weight to all of the various components of your application. I would suggest that you submit the best possible personal statement, the best possible letter of recommendation or recommendations, because they all play an important role in helping the admissions committee get a full, complete sense of you as an applicant and a potential future law student at Chicago-Kent.
And I will say too, on the reference letters, definitely ask people who know you well and can comment on your skills and abilities as a prospective law student. If at all possible, get an academic recommendation, because those professors have taught you in class and they've graded your written work. And that can often give us some very good additional information about you as a candidate. So our next question is, that I read on the website that leadership ability is taken into account in the merit scholarship decision process. How is that quantified, and is the focus primarily on the resume? And so that is certainly something that we do take into consideration, both for admission, as we're looking at you for admission, but also for the scholarship decision process. And I will say the resume is probably primarily where we're getting that, because that's where we get to see what types of activities you've been involved with. So if you're recently an undergrad, that may be through leadership positions you had in student organizations as an undergrad, or perhaps leadership positions that you've taken on in your work experience. But this is also something that you may want to talk about in your personal statement or in an addendum to highlight for the admissions committee some of the things that you think make you a strong leader, or where you've developed those leadership skills. The next question is, if you have your master's degree, do you recommend sending those grades to in addition to your undergrad grades?
Yeah, so if you have any graduate coursework, certificates, anything outside of your undergraduate coursework, we would definitely want to see it. In fact, we ask that you do submit all of your transcripts from all of the coursework that you've taken. It is factored into the decision process.
So the next question is about if you have multiple LSAT scores and trying to decide should retake the test for an additional time, and how does that affect the application in general, and particularly given that it would be a February test. So this again is when, if you've taken the LSAT a few times, maybe 2 times already, you're trying to decide if you take it again, you really want to look at how you're doing on your practice tests, how likely you think it is that your score will increase. And so certainly applying with a stronger LSAT score can help to make you more competitive relative to the other applicants who are applying for admission in this admission cycle. And particularly with the February test, we admit applicants every year from the February exam. We don't know yet what our applicant pool will look like, so it's hard to say how competitive it will be in March when those February scores come out. In some years it's more competitive than other years, so it's really important to weigh how likely you think it is that your score will improve given that you've already taken the test a few times, relative to the fact that you're applying a bit later in the admissions cycle when we have already made a number of admissions offers. So the next question is, throughout the application process, it seems as though there's a great emphasis placed on whether or not an applicant can succeed at the university. If a student has a deficiency in a certain area, such as GPA, what things do you see in a student's file that helps to reshape your view of the applicant so you believe they will be a strong contributor to the incoming class?
So when we're reviewing applications, really the 2 tools that an admissions committee has to gauge your likelihood for academic success are your LSAT and your GPA. So if your GPA is below our median, for example, then we're going to look maybe a little closer at your LSAT and the rest of your application to ensure that you will be successful as a law student. So that's where you're really going to want to highlight what have you done to demonstrate to the admissions committee that you can handle the coursework. And again, the LSAT may play a little bit more of a role if your GPA is below our median. I don't know if there's anything else you think, Nicole.
I think that this is also a place where writing an addendum can be really helpful, because when we're looking at the GPA, we're not looking just at the GPA, but we're trying to understand if there are any factors, particularly factors outside of your control that might have impacted your GPA. So maybe you started in a major that you turned out you just had no aptitude for, you really didn't enjoy, switched to a major that you really did enjoy, and your grades improved dramatically. Or maybe you had a family member who was ill and you had to go home every weekend to take care of that family member. You were really concerned about them. That impacted your grades. As that situation improved, or you learned how to better manage your time, your grades improved. That helps us to say, well, maybe the overall GPA was low, but we really don't think those low grades are indicative of how this person's likely to perform in law school, because we've seen other evidence that their academic abilities are probably stronger than what the GPA would suggest. Another place where you can try to address this is through your choice of recommenders. So maybe you have a professor who taught you and can talk about your academic transformation over the course of your undergraduate years, and how you've addressed whatever it was that caused those weaker grades. And that also can give us confidence that you're a stronger student than the grades suggest. And then I think the last thing is just, we'll be looking at your resume. If you have work experience, some of your professional accomplishments can also let us know that you have skills and abilities that were maybe not represented by your LSAT and GPA.
I also did want to add one more point to that. We're also going to look at your grade trend. We're going to look at your major. We're going to look at whether you worked or not during school. But as Nicole said, an addendum is a way to ensure that the admissions committee doesn't miss any of that. So that's a good time for you to address any of those points.
So our next question is, if you know you're not a great standardized test taker, but you're a great student, how do you suggest portraying that other than through your grades? Hopefully we'll see that reflected in your grades, but I think another way that you can portray that is through your choice of recommenders. So if you have a professor who can talk about what an excellent student you are, the types of activities that you are involved with, how you demonstrated those academic skills, either in the classroom or maybe through other activities that you were involved with, that can help us, help to really bring that forward for the admissions committee in a way that just looking at your classes and the grades might not do. So it's always helpful for us to know more about what you actually did in your coursework, what you did in your major. Maybe you wrote an honors thesis or you had some other unique academic experience. Often recommenders are great people to talk about those because they were involved with you, and they can give us sort of an outsider's perspective on that and what you got out of that experience. So our next question, are applicants automatically considered for scholarships, or are there separate applications that must be filled out?
So this may vary by each law school, but at Chicago-Kent, once you're admitted, you are automatically considered for merit-based scholarships. There is no separate application process for the merit scholarships at Chicago-Kent.
Yeah, and I guess the one exception to that is our Honor Scholars Program, which is our very top scholarship. That does have a separate application process. You're eligible to apply for that if you have an LSAT of 160 and above. There's an application form that you fill out on our website in addition to filling out the regular Chicago-Kent application. And you write a separate essay talking about how leadership abilities and how you've demonstrated that you're a future leader in the legal profession. The honors applications are reviewed in February after the application deadline, and then we select a group of finalists to come to Chicago-Kent to interview with the dean and faculty. But that's the only scholarship we have that has a separate application process.
And if you are awarded a scholarship, that information will be included with your admission letter, typically.
So our next question is, what are the advantages of graduating from Chicago-Kent? So I think there's a lot that we can say about that. I think probably one of the things that we feel that Chicago-Kent does really well is having a really good blend of the scholarly, theoretical part of legal education blended with a lot of opportunities to get practical skills training. So there are a lot of opportunities to develop your legal skill set through our legal clinics, through getting involved with our trial advocacy teams, through our externship programs. So our faculty really want to make sure that you learn both how to think like a lawyer, so you have an outstanding legal education, but also have lots of opportunities to develop the skills that you'll need to be an effective practicing attorney. Our faculty are an outstanding group of scholars, but they also care very deeply about students and seeing you succeed, and they're very invested in your success. We also have an outstanding legal research and writing program. And that again gets to that, lots of opportunities to develop your practical skills as a student here. You'll take it 5 out of the 6 semesters that you're a student at Chicago-Kent. So you really have a chance to develop your legal writing skills and have a chance to gain familiarity with the types of documents you're going to be required to draft out in practice. And then I think, this is just we've had very strong bar passage rates over the past 15 years. We've been at or above the state pass rate. So we're really proud of the fact that our graduates have done very well on the bar exam. Anything else you want to add?
I'd add that another advantage to being a Chicago-Kent graduate is that Chicago-Kent's the second oldest law school in the state of Illinois, so we have a very large alumni base, many who are in positions of hiring. So that's going to be an advantage to you when you're out interviewing. You're almost always going to be meeting somebody who either is like a Chicago-Kent graduate or knows somebody who is.
And our next question is, so I live out of state, restricted in terms of travel, and so we do tours Monday through Thursday, but there is a way to set up in a tour on the weekend. So we do have an open house program coming up in January, and Saturday, January 27th. So that's a great opportunity. But if you're not able to come for that one, then contact us through the admissions office, and we'll see if we're able to set something up with the students so you can come and see the building while you're here. The law school is also open on the weekends. Anyone can come in and walk around and see the space, but obviously we prefer to give you an official tour of the school. So just let us know, contact the admissions office, and we'll see what we can get scheduled for you. So next question is, if you send an application with an LSAT score and then retake the LSAT at a later date, will that affect the application if it's already submitted?
No, there's actually a question in our application that asks you if you are retaking the LSAT, if you would like us to wait for that score. So you can let us know that yes, you would like us to wait. Even if you say yes and then later cancel the score or decide not to take the LSAT, you can contact us and ask us to go ahead and review your application with the current score, so you have control of that.
So how many letters of recommendation does Chicago-Kent require, and what's the maximum? So we require at least 1 letter of recommendation, and we'll accept up to 4 letters. You can send up to 4 through your CAS report with LSAC. You can also send letters directly to Chicago-Kent. So if you have a recommender who feels more comfortable sending the letter directly to us, or perhaps knows the school really well and wants to write an individual letter directly to us, that's fine as well. For the initial letter of recommendation, we recommend, if at all possible, that be an academic recommendation if you are currently in school or have recently been in school. It's also fine to do a combination of academic and non-academic recommendations. So maybe you want to have 1 or 2 professors write a letter, and 1 or 2 people who maybe have worked with through an internship or some work experience that you have, and it's fine to do that sort of combination of letters. So next question, do Chicago residents have an advantage in the admissions process?
I guess, you have an advantage in that you know the city well, if the commute to the school is going to work for you on a day-to-day basis. But in terms of, reviewing the applications, we like to see people from all parts of the world. So I don't think that living or being from Chicago is necessarily going to increase your chances for admission.
So our next question is, how many recommendations do you recommend that an applicant send with an application? So again, as I had said, we require 1. I would say most of our applicants send 2 to 3. That's probably the most common range that we see. And I think allowing us to hear from a couple of people who know you can be helpful. You certainly can send just a single letter, and particularly if it's from someone who knows you very well and writes a really strong letter. But I think there can be some advantage to having at least 1 additional letter, so we get to hear a couple of different voices, a couple of different perspectives on your application. So we have reached the end of the time for our webinar. If you have additional questions that we have not been able to answer today, please feel free to contact the Office of Admissions, and we would be happy to answer those for you. And then, as I had mentioned, we do have an open house coming up. We also have another webinar coming up. So our next webinar will be on Wednesday, December 6th. That's a virtual information session. It'll be all about the JD program at Chicago-Kent. We also have our January open house, as I mentioned, coming up on Saturday, January 27th. That program allows you to get sort of an inside look on the experience of being a law student at Chicago-Kent. You'll get to attend a couple of mini classes with Chicago-Kent faculty members and speak with current Chicago-Kent students, so it's a great opportunity to learn more about the school. And you can learn more about these and all of our other events on our website, kentlaw.iit.edu/jd/events. So thank you so much for joining us this evening, and we hope to see you again at one of our future programs. Thank you.